The summer I turned 14, my father told me to close the south shutters before noon. Not in the morning, not when it got hot, before noon, while it still felt cool inside. I didn't understand it then. I thought he was wrong. The house stayed cool all afternoon, while the neighbours sat on their porches with wet rags on their necks. I stood in our kitchen at 3 in the afternoon, in July, in Ohio, and the floor was cold under my bare feet. That stayed with me for 30 years. What we were doing had a name. I only learned the name after I left. Stack ventilation. It is the reason a house built before 1920 did not need a machine to stay livable in summer. The principle is older than this country. The practice is free, and the HVAC industry has spent decades making sure you never think to ask about it. Stay with me to the end, because I'm going to give you the exact hour-by-hour window schedule we used, the one my mother kept written on the inside of the pantry door in pencil. And I have never seen it printed anywhere. One more thing before I continue. The buried clay. 41 years. That is how long that same set of unglazed clay pots sat in the ground near our foundation vents before anyone replaced them. I will come back to that number and explain exactly what it means. Tell me in the comments, what does your house feel like at 4 in the afternoon in August? Just that. One sentence. I read every one. Here is what I want you to understand before we go further. You have likely spent real money, hundreds of dollars, maybe more, trying to solve a problem that has a free solution. Not because you are foolish, because you were never shown the alternative. The alternative was removed from common knowledge around the same time central air conditioning became standard equipment in new construction. That happened in the 1960s and 70s. Not because passive cooling stopped working, because there is no monthly bill attached to it. Nobody can sell you a monthly bill for the angle of the sun or the direction of the wind. The cooling load problem in a modern house is the same as it was in 1945. Hot air comes in. It has to go somewhere. Mechanical systems push it out using electricity. Passive systems use physics to do the same thing. Convection, conduction, and the simple fact that air moves from high pressure to low pressure, from warm to cool, from inside to outside, if you give it a path. The HVAC industry is not lying to you. Mechanical cooling works. It is just not the only thing that works. And it is the only thing that generates a recurring revenue stream. So it is the only thing that gets taught. Same summers, same houses, same physics. And somehow every year you are paying more for the same problem. My mother was not an engineer. She was a woman who had grown up in a house without electricity and learned everything she knew from the woman who raised her, who learned it from the woman who raised her. Her name was Clara. Clara Yoder. She lived to 93 in a house in Millersburg, Ohio, and she never once owned a fan. Not because she was making a statement, because the house worked without one. I went back to that house after Clara died. Her granddaughter still lived there. It was a Tuesday in late July. The outside temperature was 92 degrees by the reading on the thermometer nailed to the barn. Inside the house, it was 81. No fan running, no ice. Windows open on 2 sides, shuttered on the south. I stood in the hallway, and I counted the degrees on that thermometer twice, because I didn't trust my own eyes. 11 degrees cooler. In a house with no mechanical system at all. That is not a miracle. That is geometry and timing. Here is what we actually did. and how you can do the same thing in a house you already own. The system has 3 parts. The first part is timing. The second part is the shutters. The third part is what we called the cool sink. What I later learned is a variation on an ancient technique called a zir pot, applied to foundation ventilation. Each part is simple on its own. Together they produce the 8 to 12 degree difference I mentioned. The timing is everything. Get the timing wrong, and the other 2 parts do almost nothing. Start with timing. In Ohio in summer, outside air is coolest between 4 in the morning and 7 in the morning. That is your window, your literal window, to bring cool air into the house. During those hours, you open everything. Every window on the north and east sides of the house. Open them as wide as they go. You are not trying to let in a breeze. You are trying to flood the house with the coolest available air and let it settle into the floors, the walls, the heavy furniture. Thermal mass. Stone, brick, dense wood, plaster. These materials absorb cold the same way they absorb heat. You are charging them like a battery. At 7, you begin closing. Not all at once. Start with the east-facing windows as the sun comes up on that side. By 8:30, close the south windows entirely. By 9, the north windows come down to a hand's width, just enough for the stack to pull. You leave the upper sashes cracked on the north side of the roof if you have operable ones. Heat rises. You are giving it an exit. The south shutters go closed before 10. This is the step most people skip because it feels counterintuitive. You are blocking the breeze. But you are also blocking direct solar gain, which is the single largest source of heat load in a house in summer. A closed shutter on a south window does more cooling work per dollar than any device I have ever seen advertised. We used board and batten interior shutters, pine, unpainted. My father made them. A set of plywood shutters with a simple latch does the same job. The material does not matter. The timing and the coverage do. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the house is sealed. No air in, no air out, except through the controlled gaps at the top of the north wall. The cool air you brought in at 5 in the morning is now trapped in the thermal mass of the house. The outside can climb to 95. Inside, it will climb too, but slowly. By 3 in the afternoon, the outside is at its hottest. Inside, you might see 82 or 83 if you did everything right. That is the math. That is the whole thing. I did all of these wrong at first. I want to be honest with you about that. My first mistake was opening windows too late. I thought morning meant 8 or 9 o'clock. I missed the coldest hours entirely and wondered why the method wasn't working. The window between 4 and 7 is not poetic. It is specific. If you sleep through it, you have missed your coolest resource for the day. My second mistake was not closing fast enough. I left the east windows open until 10 because it still felt comfortable. By noon, the house was already warm. The cool charge in the walls had been overwhelmed. Closing needs to happen in sequence, by orientation, as the sun moves, not when you feel hot. My third mistake was the shutters. I left the south windows open because there was a good breeze coming through them. What I did not understand was that direct sun through glass is not the same as outdoor temperature. The surface of a south-facing window in direct sun in July can be 140 degrees. That is a space heater built into your wall. The breeze was not worth it. The shutter wins. My fourth mistake was rushing the ventilation in the evening. When it cools outside in the evening, usually by 7 or 8, you feel the urge to throw everything open immediately. But if outside air is still warmer than inside air, you're importing heat, not releasing it. I learned to hold my hand out the window for 30 seconds before opening. If the outside air felt warmer than my hand, the windows stayed closed. Patience. That is the whole discipline. If you are the kind of person who solves problems with observation instead of a credit card, you already know what to do. Now the clay pots. This is the part most people have not heard of, and it is where the 41 years comes in. An unglazed clay pot, the kind used for planting, no sealant, no finish, is porous. Water seeps through the walls of the pot very slowly, and as it evaporates, it pulls heat from whatever is closest. This is evaporative cooling. It works best when humidity is moderate and airflow is present. In Holmes County in summer, those conditions exist in the early morning and evening hours. What Clara's family had done, and what we continued, was bury 3 large, unglazed clay pots, each about 12 inches across, in the ground near the foundation vents on the north side of the house, buried to the rim, filled with water and covered with a flat stone to slow evaporation. The ground itself is cool at depth. A few feet down, the earth stays at around 55 to 58 degrees year-round. The buried pots drew that cool ground temperature into the water. When the foundation vents pulled air in during the evening ventilation cycle, that air passed near the wet clay surface of the pot and lost heat to it before entering the crawlspace. The pots were not refrigerating the air, they were shaving degrees off it, maybe 4 or 5 degrees. In combination with everything else, that matters. The pots Clara's family used lasted 41 years before one of them cracked. One cracked. The other 2 were still functional when I visited. 41 years of passive cooling from 3 objects that cost less than $7 each at any garden supply store. That is the number I planted at the beginning. That is what it means. The total setup cost for this system, shutters made from basic pine boards, 3 clay pots and a written schedule, comes to less than $7 in materials, if you already have the lumber or can source it used. The shutters are the only labour. Everything else is timing. Now, I want to be honest about who this is for and who it is not for. This system works in a house with some thermal mass. Plaster walls, brick, stone, concrete slab, dense wood framing. It works in climates where nights cool below 75 degrees, which includes most of the continental United States outside of South Florida and the Gulf Coast in midsummer. It works best in houses where you have control over the windows, meaning you are not in an apartment building where the ventilation of your unit depends on shared systems. It is not a replacement for mechanical cooling in a house with no thermal mass, thin drywall, cheap modern construction, vinyl siding over foam board. Those houses have nothing to hold the cool charge. The air comes in cold and leaves again in an hour. If that is your house, this method will help at the margins, but not dramatically. It is not for people who cannot be home to manage the schedule. The timing requires attention in the early morning. If you sleep until 9 and leave for work, you will capture maybe half the benefit. The method rewards presence. It is not a medical intervention. If someone in your household has a serious heat-sensitive condition, I am not a doctor, and this is not medical advice. Mechanical cooling gives you precise control. This does not. Anyone who tells you this method will cool a modern glass-walled office building is selling something. Anyone who tells you it will not make a meaningful difference in a pre-1970 house with plaster walls is also selling something, just a different product. Here is the larger truth behind all of it. There is very good money in convincing a family that they need a machine with a filter, a refrigerant charge, a service contract to do something that geometry and timing can do for free. The people who built this country before electrification were not suffering through summers without solutions. They built the solutions into the architecture, the habits, the schedule of the day. That knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it stopped being profitable. The method I described is not mine. It is not patented. It belongs to nobody. Which is exactly why nobody is advertising it to you. This weekend, open your north windows at 5 in the morning. Just that one step. Set an alarm if you have to. Come back and tell me, how did your house feel at noon? One sentence in the comments. I want to know what you find. Now I will close the loops I opened at the beginning. The first thing I promised you was the window schedule my mother kept written on the pantry door. Here it is in plain words as she wrote it. 4 to 7. Open north and east all the way. 7 to 8:30. Close east as sun rises on that wall. 8:30 to 9. Close south entirely. 9 to 10. Close north to a hand's width. Crack up a sash if you have one. 10 through 6 in the evening. House sealed, south shutters closed. Evening check. Hold hand out north window. Open wide only when outside air feels cooler than your hand. That is the full schedule. You can write it on a piece of paper and keep it in the kitchen. That is where it belongs. The second thing I promised to explain is the number 41. Clara Yoder's family placed those 3 clay pots in the ground in the summer of 1982. They sat there through 41 Ohio summers. 1 cracked. 2 did not. The cooling they provided was not dramatic on any single day, but over 41 summers, they cost nothing to run, nothing to maintain, and nothing to replace, until a single pot failed from a hard frost getting under the rim. $7 in materials, 41 years of service. That is the record. Cool the air before it enters, hold it in the walls, give the heat a path out. Waste nothing.